In a small town in America, life wasn't easy for everyone. The streets were lined with old shops and cracked sidewalks. Dreams often felt as broken as the pavement beneath people's feet. But even here, in this tough place, there was still hope. It flickered like a tiny flame, waiting for someone brave enough to keep it alive. 12-year-old Ethan knew all about hard times. His days started before sunrise. He searched through trash bins behind restaurants for leftover food or knocked on doors to ask if anyone needed help carrying things. He didn't do it for himself, he did it for his mom. She was sick and stayed in their tiny rented apartment. Her face was pale, but she always smiled when Ethan came home. Her illness had taken all their money, leaving them with nothing but each other. And Ethan would do anything to take care of her. Ethan's clothes were old and patched up. His shoes held together with tape. But his heart, stronger than ever. Even though his stomach growled with hunger and his body ached from being tired, he refused to give up. Every job he took, every kind thing he did, came from one belief. Doing the right thing mattered no matter how hard life got. What Ethan didn't know was that his determination was about to catch someone's eye and change everything. It was a hot afternoon. The sun beat down hard, making everything feel sticky and heavy. Ethan walked slowly along the cracked sidewalk, looking for work. His stomach growled, but he pushed the hunger aside. He had to find a way to help his mom. As he turned onto Maple Street, he saw an old man near a white house. The man looked upset. A wooden fence in front of the house had fallen apart. Tools were scattered everywhere, and the man looked like he didn't know what to do next. Ethan stopped. He didn't know this man, and he didn't have to help. But something inside him, a feeling that told him to do the right thing, made him walk over. "Excuse me, sir," Ethan said softly. "Do you need some help?" The man looked up, surprised. His sharp blue eyes scanned Ethan from head to toe before he nodded. "I could use a hand," the man said. "But I don't have much to pay you." "That's okay," Ethan replied quickly. "I just want to help." For the next 2 hours, Ethan worked hard. He hammered nails, held boards steady, and dug holes to put new posts in the ground. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his hands were full of splinters, but he kept going. Then, as he tried to lift one of the old boards, it snapped in half. Ethan froze. Guilt hit him like a wave. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, turning to face the man. "I broke it. I'll fix it. I promise." To his surprise, the man smiled. "Don't worry about it, kid. Mistakes happen. What matters is that you told me instead of hiding it." He paused, studying Ethan again. "Not many kids your age would do what you're doing today." Ethan shrugged, feeling shy. "It's just the right thing to do." When the fence was finally fixed, the man held out his hand. "My name's Mr. Harrison," he said kindly. "And thank you. You've done more than fix my fence. You've reminded me there's still good in the world." Ethan shook his hand, not sure what to say. Little did he know, this small act of kindness was about to change his life forever. After they finished fixing the fence, Mr. Harrison looked at Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "You've worked hard today, kid," he said. "Come inside for a minute. I'll get you some water." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't used to being invited into people's homes. But his throat was dry, and his legs felt weak from working so long in the heat. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you, sir." The inside of Mr. Harrison's house was simple but cozy. There were shelves filled with books, old photos on the walls, and a soft chair by the window. Mr. Harrison handed Ethan a glass of cold water and a plate of sandwiches. Ethan's eyes widened. He hadn't eaten anything like this in days. "Eat up," Mr. Harrison said, sitting down across from him. "You look like you could use a good meal." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He ate quickly, savoring every bite. But as he ate, he noticed Mr. Harrison watching him closely. It made him feel a little nervous. "So," Mr. Harrison said after a while, "what's your name?" "Ethan," he replied between bites. "And how old are you, Ethan?" 12. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. 12 years old, huh? That's a tough age to be carrying so much responsibility. He paused, then added, "Why don't you tell me about yourself? What's your story?" Ethan froze. He didn't talk about his life much, especially not to strangers. But there was something about Mr. Harrison that made him feel safe. Slowly, he began to share. He told Mr. Harrison about his mom, who was sick and couldn't work, about how their money had run out and they'd lost their home, about how he spent his days doing odd jobs just to keep them going. His voice cracked a few times, but he kept talking. For the first time in a long time, someone was listening. When Ethan finished, Mr. Harrison sat quietly for a moment. Then he leaned forward. "Ethan," he said, "you're an amazing kid. Not many people your age would do what you're doing. You've got guts, heart, and honesty." Ethan looked down, embarrassed. "I'm just trying to take care of my mom," he mumbled. "I know," Mr. Harrison said gently. "And that's why I want to help you." Ethan's head snapped up. "Help me? How?" Mr. Harrison smiled. "Let's start with this. I own a small business downtown. If you're interested, I can give you a job after school. It won't pay much, but it'll be steady work. And—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you show me you're responsible, I might be able to help with your mom's medical bills too." Ethan stared at him, stunned. Tears welled up in his eyes. For so long, he'd been fighting alone, thinking no one cared. But now, here was this man, a stranger, offering him hope. "Why?" Ethan whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Mr. Harrison's smile softened. "Because sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you. And I see something special in you, Ethan. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mind raced as he tried to process Mr. Harrison's words. A job? Help with his mom's medical bills? It sounded too good to be true. I don't know what to say," Ethan stammered, tears streaming down his face. Thank you so much." Mr. Harrison reached out and patted Ethan's shoulder. "You don't have to thank me yet," he said with a warm smile. "Just promise me one thing. You'll keep doing what you're doing. Keep working hard, stay honest, and never lose that heart of yours." Ethan nodded fiercely. "I promise, sir. I won't let you down." The next day, Ethan ran home as fast as he could. His mom was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a thin blanket, her face pale but still kind. When she saw Ethan burst through the door, her eyes lit up. "What's wrong?" she asked, worried. "Is everything okay?" "Mom," Ethan said breathlessly, "something amazing happened." He told her everything about fixing the fence, meeting Mr. Harrison, and the job offer. Her eyes widened as he spoke, and by the time he finished, tears were streaming down her face too. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. "This is a miracle. But are you sure this man can be trusted? We don't want to owe anyone anything." "He's different, Mom," Ethan insisted. "He's kind, and he believes in me. I think this might be our chance to turn things around." Over the next few weeks, Ethan started working at Mr. Harrison's business after school. It wasn't glamorous. He swept floors, stocked shelves, and helped customers, but it gave him a sense of purpose. For the first time in months, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. True to his word, Mr. Harrison began paying for Ethan's mom's medical bills. Slowly but surely, her health improved. She started smiling more, laughing even, and Ethan could see the weight lifting off her shoulders. Their tiny apartment, once filled with worry and despair, now felt like a home again. But Mr. Harrison didn't stop there. He noticed how bright Ethan was, how curious he was about everything. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Mr. Harrison handed Ethan a book. "Here," he said. "I think you'll like this." Ethan looked at the cover. It was a science book, one he'd always wanted to read but could never afford. "Thank you," he said softly, running his fingers over the pages. "You've got potential, Ethan," Mr. Harrison said. "Don't waste it. Someday, I think you'll do great things." Those words stuck with Ethan. They became his motivation, pushing him to study harder, dream bigger, and never give up. Even when life got tough, and it still did, he remembered Mr. Harrison's belief in him. One night, As Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he made a silent promise. If he ever succeeded, if he ever got out of this hard life, he would help others the way Mr. Harrison had helped him. He wouldn't forget where he came from, or the kindness that saved him. Months turned into years, and Ethan's life began to change in ways he never imagined. With Mr. Harrison's help, he found stability for the first time. He worked hard at the store after school, always giving his best effort. His grades improved because he finally had a safe place to study and focus. For once, he wasn't constantly worried about where his next meal would come from or how to pay for his mom's medicine. Mr. Harrison became more than just a boss. He became a mentor and a friend. He taught Ethan about responsibility, integrity, and the importance of helping others. Success isn't just about money, Mr. Harrison often said. It's about making a difference in the world. Ethan took those lessons to heart. He started noticing the struggles of people around him. The homeless man begging on the corner, the single mother juggling 2 jobs to feed her kids, the elderly neighbor who couldn't carry her groceries home. Whenever he could, Ethan stepped in to help. Sometimes it was small things like sharing his lunch or lending a hand. Other times it was bigger gestures, like convincing Mr. Harrison to donate supplies to families in need. One day, as Ethan walked home from school, he saw a young boy sitting alone on a park bench. The boy looked hungry and tired, his clothes dirty and torn. Ethan stopped and sat beside him. "Hey," Ethan said gently, "are you okay?" The boy shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "I'm fine." Ethan didn't push. Instead, he pulled out the sandwich he'd saved from lunch and handed it over. "Here, you look like you could use this more than me." The boy hesitated before taking the sandwich. "Thanks," he mumbled. That moment reminded Ethan of himself, of the days when he was alone, hungry, and scared. It made him even more determined to succeed, not just for himself but for others like this boy. As high school graduation approached, Ethan poured everything he had into his studies. He dreamed of becoming a doctor, inspired by the doctors who had cared for his mom. With Mr. Harrison's support, he applied to colleges and scholarships, hoping against hope that he'd get in. When the acceptance letter arrived, Ethan could hardly believe it. He'd been accepted into a prestigious university with a full scholarship. Tears streamed down his face as he ran to show Mr. Harrison. "You did it, kid," Mr. Harrison said, his voice thick with pride. "You earned this." At his graduation ceremony, Ethan stood on stage as valedictorian, looking out at the crowd. His mom sat in the front row, smiling through tears, while Mr. Harrison clapped loudly from the back. Ethan took a deep breath and began his speech. "I wouldn't be here today without the kindness of one person," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "Mr. Harrison believed in me when no one else did. He gave me a chance, a second chance, and I'll spend the rest of my life paying it forward." The audience erupted in applause, but Ethan barely heard them. All he could think about was how far he'd come, and how much farther he still wanted to go. Years passed, and Ethan worked harder than ever in college. He studied late into the night, balancing schoolwork with part-time jobs to cover his expenses. But no matter how tough things got, he never forgot where he came from, or the people who had helped him along the way. Finally, after years of sacrifice and determination, Ethan graduated at the top of his class. He became a doctor, just like he'd always dreamed. His first job was at a big hospital in the city, but it didn't take long for him to realize something important. He wanted to make a difference closer to home. Ethan returned to his hometown, the same small town where he'd grown up. There, he opened a free clinic to help families struggling with illness and poverty. Families just like his had been. The clinic wasn't fancy, but it was filled with care and compassion. Ethan made sure everyone who walked through the door felt valued and heard. He also hired people who were homeless or struggling to get back on their feet, giving them jobs at the clinic. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he often said. "I know, I've lived it." One day, as Ethan sat in his office going over paperwork, there was a knock at the door. A young boy peeked inside, his face shy but hopeful. Ethan smiled. It was the same boy he'd met in the park years ago, the one he'd given his sandwich to. "Hi, doctor," the boy said softly. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. Ethan's heart swelled with emotion. You don't have to thank me, he replied. Just promise me one thing. When you grow up, pay it forward. Help someone else the way I helped you. The boy nodded, his eyes bright with determination. I will. Ethan's clinic grew over time, becoming a beacon of hope in the community. People came not just for medical care but for advice, encouragement, and support. Ethan made sure every patient left feeling stronger than when they arrived. But the most rewarding part of his journey wasn't the awards or recognition. It was knowing he'd broken the cycle of struggle for himself and others. He thought about his mom often, wishing she could see how far he'd come. Though she had passed away peacefully years earlier, her love and strength still guided him every day. One evening, as Ethan locked up the clinic, he paused to look at the stars. He thought about Mr. Harrison, the man who had changed his life with a single act of kindness. Ethan had visited Mr. Harrison often over the years, bringing him updates and sharing stories of the people he'd helped. Now in his 80s, Mr. Harrison still smiled whenever Ethan came by. You've done good, kid, Mr. Harrison had told him once. Better than I ever imagined. Ethan knew he owed everything to that moment years ago, the moment he'd decided to fix a broken fence. It had taught him that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one expected. As Ethan walked home under the starlit sky, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had started with nothing but hope and determination, and now he had built a life full of purpose. And he knew, without a doubt, that the cycle of kindness would continue, because somewhere out there, another child was dreaming of a better tomorrow. And maybe, just maybe, Ethan's story would inspire them to believe they could achieve it too.